in college. And so I did all of that and I got experience that way. That was kind of my first exposure to like publishing. And it was super fun. After college, I needed to get a job. So I worked at Facebook doing marketing. I hated it, but it was a job. And I was able to move to New York and work there. Actually, Remy and I were working at the same time. She was at BuzzFeed and I was at Facebook. We did not know each other, but we were in the same building in New York, which is so funny. Both kind of feeling agonized by our jobs and wanting to write, but not. Yeah, so I did like content writing, ghostwriting while I was there. Very kind of strange, rote, boring job. And yeah, all the while I was trying to kind of figure out how I could keep writing. I took some like writing workshops around the city and like tried to carve out time to write and stuff. Then I decided I was going to apply to grad school. So I quit Facebook, which was amazing. And I did a few in the time that I was like waiting to hear back from schools and was applying. I did a couple like editorial internships in the city. So I did one at Grove Atlantic, which is like a bigger publishing house. And I did one at Akashic Books, which is like an indie press in Brooklyn. And so, yeah, those were really great ways to kind of learn about publishing and stuff. I also am a reader at the Paris Review. So I read submissions to the magazine and stuff. And that was also a good introduction to publishing and stuff. I feel like I didn't know how anything worked. I just knew that I liked books and writing. And so those experiences were like a really good way to learn about the landscape and like what people care about right now. And yeah, now I'm in grad school, so it's been good. We're no longer virtual. So yeah, that's
nice.
My trajectory.
Thanks. Charlotte, do you want to go next?
Sure. Sorry. Yeah. So let me make sure I'm not muted. All right. Yeah, I really feel like I had a somewhat traditional path, but it didn't feel like it at the time. So I have always loved writing. English was always my best subject, but I kind of had this assumption that I could not do creative writing professionally. I was kind of an assumption I had to do something else. So I'm from Kansas City. I went to the state school, University of Kansas. And, you know, I was kind of like, okay, well, do I want to do teaching? Do I want to do the academic research? Do I want to do publishing? I really didn't know. And it's just really lucky that I got an internship in New York at Scholastic. And it was really moving to the city that completely shifted my entire perception of myself and of writing. You know, and seeing and publishing the publisher I worked for is actually a gay man. And to know that you could be queer in publishing and you could be queer in like children's publishing specifically really opened my mind in a way that I didn't know it was even closed. Like I had assumed to myself that I could never really write for kids if I was queer. I'd assumed, you know, you would be blacklisted, that kind of content wouldn't be allowed to be published. And, you know, this was about 7 or 8 years ago. And it's not like there was a whole lot out there, but much more than I realized growing up in the Midwest. I mean, there were things that I didn't get to see, but that were already sort of being written by people like David Levithan and Melinda Lowe and others. And of course, it's really come a long way just in these few years. But to like kind of make a long story short, so just coming to the city, seeing so many people of color, seeing so many proud queer people was really freeing for me. And my writing totally improved and became much more honest. And my kind of goals for the future shifted because I was like, okay, well, this can be done. I didn't think it could be done. And I just needed to see it for myself. So after that, I applied to a grad program at the New School. They have one specifically for writing for children. And it's in New York. I really wanted to stay in the city. And that's really ultimately where I made the connections that got me my editor for my first book. So I kind of, again, our traditional process, like, okay, yeah, I was an English major. Then I did a creative writing MFA and, you know, then I pitched a book to an editor I met. But it felt very non-traditional to me because that was never the plan at any given moment. It was always just like, well, I'm going to try this and hope for the best. I didn't even think I could do that. So yeah, I'm kind of rambling, but that was my path.
Awesome, thank you. Sierra, why don't you go next?
Yeah, it seems like everyone's a New Yorker here right now, but I went to college I grew up in Ohio, in the Cleveland, Ohio area. I think I had a really similar story to Remy's. I was a political science major, definitely in that sort of like activist zone all the time. And I realized at a certain point, like sort of towards the end of my freshman year, early sophomore year, that writing was actually sort of my preferred mode of activism. And I think the two disciplines still go hand in hand, like very heavily. So, if you're interested in other things, you can definitely integrate those passions and those interests into your writing and sort of like do both of those things at once. But yeah, I graduated with a degree in English and sort of took all the opportunities I could during that time, like during my undergraduate time, reading for lit mags. I did an internship with the Muse, and I still work for the Muse doing social media, marketing stuff. And I got the opportunity to work remotely. Maybe one of the good things to come from COVID is that you could do things like internationally or across the country at least. And so I was able to work with City Lights publishers in San Francisco while I was in school in Ohio. And so after that, I kind of was ready to do like an MFA program. So I applied for all that. And I'm currently an MFA candidate at Naropa University in Boulder, Colorado. Just started this fall, so sort of new to it, but happy to talk more about that, the process of applying, and also sort of what it means and the workload and what really sort of like the goals and possibilities that are open through the MFA, as opposed to sort of like just moving into like publishing or something after undergrad. Thanks.
Awesome, thank you. And last but not least, Ashley.
Hi guys, sorry I was a little bit late. I was just driving back from a weekend upstate, but I'm Ashley. I have a couple of YA novels out currently, and I guess I guess I'm thinking about my path and like where to start the story. But I've always loved writing. I think I wrote my first story when I was in like first grade or something. So it's always been a part of my life. I think for a really long time, similar to Charlotte, I just assumed that I couldn't do it as my job. I just thought that was unrealistic, I guess. And so when I was in school, I went to Rutgers University. I majored in English and communication. So another like liberal arts head over here. And I really didn't know what I wanted to do when I graduated. I've always loved children. And so I just assumed that I would become a teacher. But I read this book called I'm an English major, Now What? And as I was reading that book, I found inside that book, they include information about a couple of postgraduate publishing programs. There's one in Denver, there's one at Columbia, and there's one at NYU. And so I applied to all of them. And I got into the NYU one. And so I was really excited. I had moved back home after I graduated, home to Washington, DC, which is where I'm from. And I had been doing some postgraduate internships because I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do or where I wanted to go. And I got into that program. So I went there, did the program, and it was a 6-week like summer intensive. And that was awesome. I feel like I sort of learned a ton about publishing in a very short period of time. I did not go to grad school. I don't have a master's. Shortly after that program, I just was applying for jobs, and I got a entry-level position at Random House. And so that's really how my publishing career started. I was working in marketing. I worked in marketing my entire publishing career. So I was at Random House on the adult side for about 5 years. I moved over to children's at Random House because I had always, like, my heart was always with kids' books, and I always wanted to work on children's literature. But, you know, when you're trying to get into publishing, you just kind of like put your foot in the door however you can get in there. And so when I saw a job opening on the kids side at Random House, I applied right away. To make a kind of long story short, I really didn't get along with my boss at Random House on the children's side. And so pretty quickly, I had started looking for another position in children's lit. And I found a job at Macmillan. It was a step up, which was great. And it was still doing marketing, and it was still working with kids' books. So it was like everything that I wanted. And that worked out great. I really, really loved the new team that I started working with. I actually, this weekend, I was away with my former boss from Macmillan. And another reason why I knew that Random House Kids was not really a place for me to thrive is when I had been writing this whole time. And when I started working at Random House Kids, it really just like shut down my creative juices, my voice. I was just so stressed out and so anxious all the time that I wasn't really able to write. And I had started this novel that I really believed in and thought was really strong, but hadn't been able to finish it because I was so stressed out all the time. And so when I went to Macmillan, I was able to finish that novel. And that wasn't by any means the first novel that I wrote to completion, but it was the first one that I thought was good enough. And that was the novel that ended up being my debut and ended up getting me an agent and all of that kind of stuff. And I can get into more of the nitty gritty of like looking for an agent and the publication process if that's something you guys are interested in hearing about, but I'll just stop here for now.
Awesome. Thank you all. I also realized I might give a brief overview of my path to working here at the Muse as well, while we're at it, so you know who's asking questions. But I started off at the Muse in the original Teen Writers Workshop. I grew up in Norfolk like about 12 years ago. And I did that all through like middle and high school. And then I went up to Vermont for college. Also in the liberal arts path. I was actually a religion major. I kind of dropped writing. I just didn't that much outside of my classes, and like, yeah, so it wasn't on my radar at all. It was not something I was looking for. But I ended up interning at the Muse over the summer and in 2018, 2019, and then moved back to Norfolk because of the pandemic. It was not my plan at all to do that, and then came on part-time about a year ago at the Muse and full-time in January. And in the interim, though, I actually started freelance book editing while I was still in college. While I was a junior in college, my mom was writing a book. She had been asked to write a book through her work as a professional speech language pathologist, if you're interested. And she asked me to edit it. She's like, "Can you just like look this over, please? I'll like give you $100." And I was like, "Yeah, sure, sounds good." And then someone else had asked her who she got to edit her book, and she passed on my name. And then I started editing his work, and then he passed on my name to someone else. So I've been doing that. I was doing that while I was a full-time undergrad student, and I've been doing that ever since. And one of my current clients just got an agent for her book. So I'm really excited for her about that. But so I've also been doing that on the side and writing. And while I was in college, I interned at the New England Review. Yeah, everyone thank my mom, please. She's like pushing my name out in the world. I don't even have to network. I got my mom doing it. No, but yeah, I interned at the New England Review, which was wonderful, and it's based in Middlebury. And now I'm a fiction submissions reader for them as well, which is a volunteer position. I read 20 submissions a month from the slush pile, and I like leave feedback on it all through Submittable. So thumbs up, thumbs down, question mark, and then I leave my thoughts. But that's also been really cool to be on that side of Submittable. So that's a little bit about how I got here. And we will start off with some of the questions that a few of y'all sent in ahead of time, possibly just one, but then I think, especially now that y'all have heard everyone's journeys, I'm sure you've had more questions come up. So if you think of something, do the little like hand raise in Zoom. You can also put it in the chat if you don't want to say it out loud, but it'd be awesome if you did want to ask out loud. Either way, but I think we'll start off with, I don't know who sent what questions, but one question was to the panelists. What advice would you have for college applicants or people who are starting to look at colleges and life beyond high school? Who wants to start that off?
Writing specific advice or just general advice?
Excellent question. Teams, do y'all have a preference? If not,
well, for me, I think I sent that question in. I think I hear the same, I think you all mentioned it, how it's kind of hard to imagine yourself writing, for me anyways, as like a career, because I used to think it was so bohemian. And like this past year, I've learned so much, but I thought I'm like, oh, you're gonna be broke as a writer. So I'm afraid of applying to schools as a creative writing major or as a literature major, English major. So like, I'm really indecisive too. So I don't know. What is your advice on that? Like, should I just go for it or should I maybe start off somewhere else, then land elsewhere? I don't know.
Sorry. I can jump in real quick and just say, you can get an English major, and even if you don't end up wanting to write, it is useful for a lot of things. Like, you would be surprised how much basic communication skills are lacking in a lot of fields. And there's really, I mean, people joke about English majors, you know, like not having jobs, but you really, I think you can't go wrong with it. I think you will land somewhere. So there's that. But I would also say, for sure, do what you love, and try what you love before, you know, saying, okay, I'm going to do something else. Like I very recently just got myself a day job, just in tech support, and it's not at all writing related. And it's actually very, it's a relief for me to have a job that is not like of my heart, so I can focus on the writing entirely when I'm not at work. So it's the kind of thing where, okay, maybe you do the writing and you get a job doing something else. It doesn't have to stop you from doing the writing at all, by any means. So I guess those would be my two pieces of advice. And, you know, just do what makes you happy first and foremost.
I feel like the job market is so bad right now that you might as well do something that you love, like no matter what you major in. A little pessimistic, but I did graduate right into a pandemic. So personally, that's where I'm at. Sierra, were you going to hop in earlier?
Yeah, I think all of what Charlotte said is totally true. I also think that, you know, while you're applying, if you're sort of considering which schools might be best for you and for what you want to get out of it, and you're also sort of thinking ahead, like, what's this going to look like when I have this degree, you can sort of ask those questions, like, to somebody in admissions or somebody in the English department, sort of ask like what opportunities they have there for professional development. Does the school have like a literary magazine you could work with, so that, you know, you can immerse yourself in these various things that would be interesting and gratifying for you. But also you have some things to put on your resume after you graduate that can help you sort of get your foot in the door with an internship or some sort of like entry-level job in publishing, or even to put on like an MFA application, things like that, to show that you know, you're part of these writing communities and you've been taking advantage of the opportunities that your school provided for you, everything like that.
I would also say that college is supposed to be fun. Like, I feel like I'm like one of the older people on the panel. And like, so I've been out of college for a while. And when I look back at college, I just wish that I wasn't so stressed out all the time about things that ultimately did not matter as much as I thought that they did in the moment. So I think you should take the classes that you're interested in, major in something that you know you will enjoy, and worry about everything else after. Because look, I worked in publishing and I knew people who were bio majors. I knew people who were history majors. I knew people who were English majors, of course, but I also knew people who majored in poli-sci, and like it was just like across the board. So ultimately, most employers care more that you graduated from college than what you majored in. Like, they don't actually care. And any job that you start, especially your first job out of college, you're gonna have to be trained. You're gonna have to learn everything from scratch. So it's really not that big of a deal. Like, and I know I feel like there's so much emphasis placed on what you major in and what activities and things that you do in college, but like my first job out of college was, I don't think I mentioned this, was I worked at a daycare, like a Montessori school, because I still thought that maybe I wanted to be a teacher. And then I was like, wait, I don't want to do this. So it won't define you for the rest of your life, whatever you major in. So just do something that you won't be super overwhelmed by the entire time that you're in college, and you're able to enjoy that time.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I don't think your major really matters that much in the end. So yeah, follow your heart and do what you want. I would apply to programs or schools that you're excited about the classes they offer, the professors that could be teaching you in like a creative writing setting if that's what you want to do. And yeah, when else are you going to have 4 years to just like learn what you want? So yeah, definitely go for it.
I only took one creative writing class my entire college career, and I'm a full-time novelist, if that helps you at all.
That's amazing. I will also add into this, as someone who went to a very small school in the middle of nowhere, Vermont, do be aware that location does have an impact. Like a lot of y'all are in New York and had internships there, which now might be changing because of the pandemic. I know a lot of the big publishers and some of the smaller ones are doing virtual internships, but just be aware when you're looking around, like everyone's been saying, your major doesn't matter as much, but it is good to have those kind of opportunities if you want them, to get that professional mentorship while you're still in college, while you still have like housing and meals through your school, if that's like the plan that you're on, because it gets a lot harder to do an internship that is either unpaid or low paying when you are no longer a student and have that support. So definitely be aware of just like your physical location of where you're looking at and kind of what's available to you around there. Not to say that you have to be in New York. Like, you know, I did okay in Vermont, but it was definitely more limiting at a certain point. Do any of you, the teens, do y'all have any specific questions that have come up that are in the same general trajectory? I can also bring up some more that you sent in already. Yeah, what Remy said while she was muted.
I guess while we're just waiting for a question, I'll also say, you said, the perception of writing is that it's very bohemian. And I do want to like say, for better or worse, it's actually extremely corporate and capitalistic. So kind of go into it with that in mind. If you're trying to write, traditional published something, just be like, okay, this is a business and I am making a product. And that does not mean you compromise on your vision. That does not mean you write something that you don't want to write. It just means that, you can like separate some of your emotional attachment to writing versus like the actual job of it. Was useful for me, at least.
Yeah, I think that's true. Just to like piggyback on that, like, I feel like a lot of people, when they think about writing as a career, I also didn't mention this, but I left my job in publishing right before the pandemic because I had a baby, and I was like, I don't think I can have a baby, work 9 to 5 and write books all at the same time. So luckily I was in a position where I could leave my job to write full time. Shout out to my hubby for holding it down. But that said, it is a decision, a very big decision to try to write full time. There is so much more to writing books than just writing the books. Like, there's lots of emails you have to answer. There's lots of panels you have to be on. And, that might not be your thing, right? There's lots of self-promotion that you have to do. And so there's a lot of different aspects of being a full-time writer now than, you know, there used to be 15 or 20 years ago. The whole bohemian like idea of it, I feel like is what it used to be like. You know, I don't know. I think of like the Harlem Renaissance and like everybody was just hanging out in cafes and like vibing. That's not really what it's like anymore, unfortunately. Although we do have those vibing moments. Those moments still exist. But yeah, it is a business, just like Charlotte was saying. Like, you have to be profitable in order to continue to do this work. And so yeah, it's just something to keep in mind.
That kind of goes into possibly another question that was sent in, which is, what is a part of publishing that seems the most daunting, but actually isn't as bad as it seems? And I would say maybe opening that up to both publishing and writing, and both of those as career choices.
I can jump in again. Okay, for me, and this is my particular experience, I feel like the answer is the same. And it is having any kind of marginalization and being in a largely white business, white, straight, mostly women business. Microaggressions abound. There is lots of sort of moments where you're mistaken for someone else if you're a person of color, or there's lots of over-explaining things. There's lots of meetings that you'll be in if you're working in publishing where you have to say, no, like that's not the way things work. That's like a cis het, like white idea, and this is like what is really happening. And sometimes you are the only person. You might be the only queer person. You might be the only person of color in a room to say those things. So I think that's something to keep in mind if you're thinking about a career in publishing. Not to say that it's bad, and I think publishing now is much more aware of these issues and these problems and are actively working to make them better than they were when I first started working in publishing, but those problems still exist. And then I think it's very similar on the writing side of things. Like if you're writing something that isn't, I don't know what 90% of published books are, I wouldn't say it's harder to get your foot in the door. It's just you're fighting a bit of an uphill battle. And then there's certain things that, certain conversations that you'll have to have that you wouldn't necessarily think about having in advance. Like I had to, so my upcoming novel is my first novel in verse. And on the cover, it's two Black girls, sort of like their face, do I have one? Their faces are like sort of intertwined, sort of like a Venn diagram. And then one of the girls has like a huge afro. And I had to fight tooth and nail for them not to put the title of the book over her afro. I was like, please do not treat her hair as negative space. And like, that was like an argument that I didn't anticipate having to have. So it's just like nuanced things like that you don't necessarily anticipate or think about. That if you're going into a business where you are the other for whatever reason, disabled, queer, POC, whatever, there are complicated conversations and nuances that you might end up having to explain or having to speak up about that otherwise you wouldn't necessarily have to.
I can also, and if I'm talking too much, please let me know. I think Ashley and I are the old heads here. So maybe
you're talking less than me, so.
Yeah, I was like, I feel like maybe we just have more to say because we just have been like in the trenches a little longer. But yeah, I would say something that was really, this is on the positive side, something I didn't expect. I always tell people don't compare your writing to published books because these have all been edited. So it's like comparing your own selfies to like an airbrushed, photoshopped model, because it's just like, this photo has been edited in the same way these books have been edited. And when I was working in publishing and seeing the manuscripts that were coming in, they were all, you know, rough drafts. This is not roasting the manuscripts. This is how they're supposed to be. But I was like, oh, like everybody's stuff is rough, and you know, you have this kind of perception that's like this is an unattainable level to get your writing to like big 5 publishing level, and then but then you see the stuff coming in, you're like, oh, like this is very attainable actually. Like these are just things that need to be, like the editing really does a lot more than I think you might realize, and the publishing like industry in general, like I kind of went into it thinking it's like, oh, it's just the writer and the editor, but there's really these whole teams of people, design teams, there's you know, the marketing and publicity teams, there's the management teams who do all these like tiny little things that you would not even think about, but they keep the whole thing running. So it really does take a village, and it's interesting to see that. I do think even if you don't want to work in publishing, it can be beneficial to do like a semester and just kind of see how it works, and to see, like I did, like, oh, okay, like it's really like a whole team of people getting the book to what I see on the shelf, and what I do, you know, they are not expecting it to be at that level yet, and that's okay. That's why they're there. That's what they want to see. That's what, you know, they're looking for potential, not perfection. So I just keep that in mind.
I was just gonna add something. This is just like specific to writing, which is like just being vulnerable and putting your stuff out there. I was always really like protective of my work and kind of self-conscious and didn't want to share my writing. And the first workshop I took in college, I was like terrified. I guess this doesn't really apply to you since you're all here. But yeah, and then just like as I've been submitting my own work to various magazines and stuff, just kind of like going for it and, you know, dealing with rejection. And now I feel like I open up my laptop and I get a rejection every day and I'm just like, okay, it's fine. And then I like delete the email and it's just like, yeah, it's not as bad as it's, you know, it's not personal. And also being on the other side as a reader at a literary magazine, it's been useful to kind of see how the whole process works and all the different factors that go into accepting a piece or not. And so, yeah, that's been an interesting kind of learning curve for me to just, yeah, go for it.
The number of like really amazing pieces that either I or I have turned down or I've passed it on to the editor and they've turned it down is like so incredibly high. It's just, there's only so much physical space in a magazine. So if you're submitting shorter stuff to magazines, shorter as in not novel length, like just be aware that a rejection does not mean it was bad. There is so much kind of behind the scenes that goes into putting that, physically putting it together, that's often a deciding factor. Here, did you want to speak to the?
Yeah, I just wanted to add also that publishing is like a huge field. And so if we're talking, like we've sort of been talking, it seems, about larger publishing houses like Penguin, Macmillan, those types of places. But having worked with a small independent publisher, City Lights, you know, the workflow and the responsibilities that might be put on you as an individual employee at like Penguin Random House versus at City Lights is very different. That's just to say, if you're working on a much smaller team, you might have like your fingers in various different pots like at all times. You might be more involved with several different processes, from like marketing to editorial stuff, design. You might sort of be asked to be part of more of that stuff. So if you're interested in pursuing publishing, I think it's important to think about what kind of publishing you want to do and what kind of roles you ultimately want to have within that. And also, you know, like we've been talking about at these big 5 publisher type level writing, people that are publishing books for a larger audience, perhaps mass market fiction, stuff like that. Maybe that's not your thing. Maybe you're interested in working with like super experimental, like super specific types of writing. And so there are publishers that do that kind of stuff too. So, you know, really trying to find the right publisher if you're interested in doing that, or even interning with somebody. Just thinking like that there are definitely huge differences between what you might be doing, depending on just the publisher that you want to work with.
Yeah, I'll add to that actually. As I said before, I I did an internship at Akashic Books, which is an independent press in Brooklyn. And this was when I had no idea how publishing worked, and it was a great place. There are like 4 people who worked there. And so as an intern, I got to like edit manuscripts that they're like coming out with 6 months from then. And so, yeah, it was just a great way to see how everything worked on like a small scale in like a non-corporate setting. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Kel. All right, teens, you're up. Someone unmute and ask a question.
Come on.
Or put it in the chat. Yeah, Remy called you out earlier, apparently. Do you have a question?
I don't really have a new question, but like I'll just ask the one that like I sent earlier, which is, how do you decide on what the cover art should be on your books?
Ashley, you were talking about that a little bit, about your cover art. Do you want to speak to that?
Sure. The short answer is you don't. It depends a lot on your publishing house, your editor. It depends on a lot of different factors, right? If you're lucky, I've been really lucky in that my publishers and my editors always helped let me be involved and let me have a bit of a say in what ended up on the cover. Like sometimes it was as simple as, we won't put a cover on this book that you hate. And so they would just keep showing me things until they found something that I didn't hate. Or it's been as involved as like them being able to send them artists that I like and that I would like to be considered for the cover art, or them sending me a list and me picking one. So it just depends on who you're working with and what the process ends up being. It depends a lot on your agent and how pushy they are. And it depends on your personality too, because there's some authors who are just like so excited and so happy to be being published that they're just like, whatever, everything's amazing. And then there's people like me who are more picky and definitely deeply, deeply grateful, but also being like, I don't want my book to look ugly. So yeah, it depends on a lot of different factors, but that's basically how it's gone for me. Sometimes I will be super vague and just say like, I really want this cover to be mostly text, right? Like I don't want people on the cover. But a lot of times it depends on, so sort of going into my like publishing background, it depends on the marketing department and on sales. Because sometimes the sales team will say, oh, yellow covers aren't working right now. And so like, if you had a yellow cover, they will just change the color. Or they'll say, oh, Barnes & Noble hated this cover, we have to change it, because they want Barnes & Noble to take your book. And this is all, I should say, because Sierra made a really good point, that this is all, my experience is fully just like big five. Like I've only been published at, major publishers, and I've only worked at major publishers. So I can't speak to the independent publishing side of things. I imagine they would be more flexible and less like, this is what you have to do. But yeah, that's been, a lot of times it's sales, and a lot of times it's just like the team that you end up working with that sort of makes those decisions.
I'm happy to, I'll be brief this time, but yeah, I will echo what Ashley said. I can only speak for these big five publishers process. And I think you're probably right that it's a lot more rigid than you might find elsewhere. They are sort of beholden to like Barnes & Noble and other influences. But yes, I could show you the cover of my newest book. This came out in August. And the basic design philosophy of the two girls, their sisters, and the sort of starry night being made out of their clothes, that was sort of set in stone. But I kind of suggested like, okay, I want people to know this is a Wild West inspired fantasy. So it's like, can we get the cow skull and some cacti, I don't know. And like we played a little bit with the font and the color of the font. So there were like there's wiggle room for sure. Well, and yeah, good point. You mentioned hair. Like, I wanted this to be very realistic Afro textured hair. And it wasn't at first. She had like a 3B curl pattern. And I was like, this is, not how the character is described in the book. Can we adjust that? So there's a lot of room for input, but for the most part, I try to just trust that the design team and the illustrator or the photographer that they hire probably know better than I do, and then the marketing team probably know better than I do. Actually, right, they might be like, you probably remember in like 2010, everything was like gunmetal gray with a circle on it because we were all doing the Hunger Games covers kind of thing. And so they might be like, okay, this is in right now. We got to do something like this. And, there were girls in dresses for a while. I don't really know what era we're in now.
I think we're in like illustrated covers now.
Yeah. I do like those better. I think everybody has their preferences. But yeah, that's just basically, that was my process, I guess.
Yeah, I can also speak a little bit of from what I've observed at City Lights, like their process of designing. And, I think that at a smaller publisher, maybe you do as the author have a little more say in what's going on, possibly, but also it does come down to, if the publisher has fewer resources maybe, or it's working with a particular printer, like every color that's going to be on the cover might cost more money. So it's sort of like you might be limited to like a color palette. For that reason, it also matters like even what type of paper is going to be used that determines the thickness of the book. So then you're limited with what can be on like the binding, things like that. Like everything that you would never really think about kind of goes into these design decisions. So ultimately, in a lot of ways, like Charlotte and Ashley have both said, it comes down to sort of like the professionals and what has to happen versus your own sort of like personal images of what you imagined when you wrote it.
Yeah, and really quick, this is the book I was talking about. So originally they had the title just like across this, and I was like, can you get it out of her hair, please? But yeah, that was basically it. I helped pick this artist. They sent me like a list of options, and I picked the artist based on like looking at their Instagram, basically.
We choose everything nowadays. Camille, did you want to add to any of that from kind of the smaller side of things?
I think for Akashic, yeah, I'm no expert on this question, but I think for Akashic, they worked really closely with the authors to choose what they wanted their cover to be. And that was like in line with their aesthetic as an indie press. So that's as much as I know, yeah.
I have a question from Evelyn, who just texted me because her computer isn't working, but she's here. She wants to know, this is a good one, and I actually would like to hear the answer to this question as well. How do you schedule time to write, find time to write, make space for it when you're feeling uninspired?
I can answer this first, I guess. I'm sure everybody has different answers. But this summer, I really struggled with this we were off of school, obviously. And I really wanted to, keep up writing in like a self-imposed way. But I was also feeling very bad and struggling a lot and feeling stuck in the novel I'm working on. And I decided to just kind of keep a rigid schedule of writing 500 words a day. And I made like a little spreadsheet where every day I just log word count and how many words I wrote. And I started writing like one word about how I'm feeling and like one word about what I worked on within the novel. And that really helped me like keep myself accountable and also feel accomplished, like, because I like, lists and checking things off lists. And so being able to go back to that spreadsheet and see when I skipped a day or wrote 100 words, and just like, it was a good way for me to visualize progress too. And working through if you're feeling motivated or not, I think it's good practice to just like open up the computer, like pull up the Word doc and like write something, even if it's not perfect. And so, that was really an interesting experience, and that kind of has worked for me. But also, if you're feeling really bad, take a week off. It's okay. Yeah.
Awesome. We can kind of go back up the line, I suppose. Sierra, do you want to speak to that next?
Sure, yeah. I really like everything Camille just said, but I also think, you know, giving yourself room to breathe and to read, especially if you're working on a particular project and you just can't write that day, reading things that are sort of like aligned with that project can help you, or reading something that's like totally unrelated to that project could help you, give you some insight. Also going back into like old things that you've abandoned and just like reading your own work, flipping through your notebooks, I think can sort of give you some direction in a lot of ways, or even just remind you of where you were and where you are. Or maybe like a line will stand out and you're like, oh, why did I abandon this poem? I can use this right now. And so just finding those ways that work for you to maybe like spark some sort of excitement about the process again in some way. And that can come in a lot of forms, but I think that reading and rereading can definitely do all that.
Awesome. We're gonna go Ashley and then Charlotte. We're running close to the end of our time, just as a heads up. So if any of y'all have more questions, pop them in the chat and we'll try to get to them, but about 7 minutes left.
Yeah. I am probably more gentle with myself than most people are. I'm not the most disciplined. And if I'm feeling uninspired, I like to skip around. So sometimes when I feel stuck, it's because I'm stuck on a specific part or a specific like section. And so I'll just write a scene that I'm looking forward to writing. So I'll skip to a different part of the book and just like write that and then go back to the other part later when I'm feeling a little bit better about it. And sometimes writing something else will unlock it. And I think another thing that I do is I watch a lot of movies that are in a similar tone or that just make me happy, I guess. And so if I'm writing a book that is, you know, set during a snowstorm or something, maybe I'll like watch Love Actually, or I'll watch like, you know, a movie where it's like the same season. Because sometimes just seeing, you know, your imagination is great, but sometimes seeing it in front of you is really helpful to unlock things. Or just watching a comfort movie, if you're feeling bad, will just make you feel better. And then you might be able to go back to the page with a better attitude.
Yeah, and I'm going to give some advice that I don't take myself, but probably the best thing I heard on writer's block, just kind of different from being uninspired, but I think it could apply to both, is to lower your standards for yourself. Because a lot of times it's like, I do have ideas and there are things I could write, but I don't want to do it because I don't feel like they're good enough, or, you know, I don't think they're going to work and I'm going to have to rewrite them later. And you're gonna have to do that anyway. You know, you always have to go back and edit. And that's just what the process is. So, you know, if you are stuck and it's just like, well, let me just write something for now, knowing I'm going to change it, and that's okay. That's the process. You know, the dialogue does not have to be perfectly, you know, in tune. The action scene does not have to be, you know, jumping off the page yet. I mean, the whole point is that you're just supposed to get the thing finished first and then you can edit it. But I'm very bad at doing that. I am super hard on myself. I try to edit as I go, in vain, because that's really not what you're supposed to do. I mean, to an extent, but like you really cannot be perfecting each sentence during the first draft, because, you know, whole chapters get thrown out, whole characters get deleted. So that's not really the focus in the drafting phase, at least. So having just finished this duology here, and, you know, between the pandemic and everything, I've been feeling pretty burnt out. I'll be honest. I have not been writing really at all this summer. And I am struggling to kind of get back into it. But I guess the other piece of advice I would give, which is what something my therapist said, is just to be thinking of burnout as like a sports injury, or, you know, something where it's like you do have to take time to heal. you do have to be gentle getting back into it, and rushing it just kind of makes it worse. So if you do find yourself feeling burnt out from, anxiety, or maybe you're just busy with a lot of other things, just be really gentle and gracious with yourself. It's okay to take breaks. You don't have to write every day, even if you're not dealing with that kind of thing. I mean, you really can just take a day or two off. And I think you'll be better in the long run.
I'll jump in briefly because definitely second that. Something that my therapist told me is that everyone has different creative cycles, the same way everyone has different energy cycles. Some people are morning people, some people are night owls. And for me personally, and actually a lot of people I know, creative cycles kind of come and go. So there'll be times where I'm not outputting a lot of stuff, but it's usually when kind of ideas are more percolating, but they're not ready to be on the page yet. And so to just kind of respect that and like put it aside, not even think about it for a while, because eventually it'll come back up for you. But there's also a balance between like letting things percolate during a more like fallow time and just completely like putting things aside and putting it off and procrastinating. So just kind of navigating that for yourself. Olivia, do you want to ask your question? Leave in the chat.
Yeah, I said, okay, what did I say? I said, speaking of lists, I think, who brought it up? Camille, you brought it up. Yeah, you brought up lists. How do you determine your short-term and long-term writing goals?
So, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, the only long-term writing goal that I have is to be a writer for as long as possible. And so I just try to keep that in mind. My short-term goals are usually focused on whatever project I'm working on at that moment. And that can change. Like I can jump around to different projects too. So I feel like I'm more like relaxed about these things, but I'm always just like, whatever I'm working on right now, I just want to try to make this as good as it can possibly be. So that hopefully it does well enough that I can write another one. So that's kind of how I manage my goals. As far like if you're talking about due dates or self-imposed deadlines and that kind of stuff, I tend to make more casual sort of deadlines, unless I'm on a hard deadline like from a publisher or something. So I'll say, oh, I want to finish half of this book by October or something like that. I keep it more broad. But if I'm on like a stricter deadline, then I just break whatever I'm working on into pieces. And I take it like a piece it's like a chunk at a time. I might say like 3 chapter chunks or something like that. And I'll say, okay, I want to finish these 3 chapters by the end of next week, or something like that. That's not super scientific, but that's what I do.
I guess I would kind of say the opposite, just because I'm in a different place in my writing career than you, Ashley. But I would say my long-term goal is selling a book, and yeah, like writing a draft, getting an agent, all of that. And so my short-term writing goals, I guess, just feed off of that, which is just like, what do I want to get done today in terms of the project I'm working on right now, which oftentimes is like word count for me, or finishing a scene, or starting the scene. And yeah, working in pieces on a larger project.
I don't make lists because I am very chaotic, and people always ask as well, like, are you a plotter or a pantser? I am a pantser by nature and sort of forced to be a plotter, and kind of because of deadlines and things. So I think I really could benefit from a lot of what y'all are saying about setting goals and sticking to them. But just some goals, some more general goals, since I clearly cannot make like word count type goals for myself, but some general goals. It's like, okay, I want to make sure I'm always writing something that feels honest to me, and that I'm not trying to change what I'm writing to cater to a specific audience or anything. Because, that's what I did all growing up. I was writing, I've been writing my whole life. And a lot of times I just was thinking, oh, I have to write about a straight white girl because that's what YA was for years. And once I started finally writing about people like me, it became just much more fun, first of all. And I mean, the writing itself, I feel like improved. So I'm always trying to do that because there's a lot of subconscious ways that I sort of steer myself away from things. So I try to not, be acting out of fear when I write. And also just to try and have fun in that same vein. So like I said, I'm in a point where I'm feeling kind of burnt out and I'm like, I want writing to feel fun again. So what does that mean? Like, what does that look like? You can ask yourself the same question. Like if you are feeling like, okay, this isn't fun anymore, maybe see what you can do to adjust your process. Maybe you need to set a project aside and do something else for a little bit. Do whatever you can to kind of try and keep things feeling fun for yourself.
Yeah, I kind of feel like I sided with Charlotte a little more, just like never really make lists or hard to-do lists or anything. But yeah, I think it can be destructive in some ways to quantify a goal, unless you're up against some sort of institutional deadline, like with a publisher or school or something. But I personally, like if I wake up in the morning and I'm like, I want to write today, as long as I sort of feel good about what I write today, that's sort of like a good indicator that I've met my sort of short-term goal in that way. And then as far as like setting other goals for myself, I sort of think about like diversifying these goals and these like checkpoints in my writing just by sort of like staying on task with like submitting to literary journals, finding like a few poems that like I really would like to get published somewhere this year or something, and just really like being serious about submitting them can be another way that's sort of different from the actual writing process, but to give yourself something that you're working towards.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. Okay, I don't know, we have run a little past 5, so if any of y'all need to go, please feel free. But I think we do have one last closing question if y'all are able to stay on for a little bit longer. Awesome. Okay, Olivia, shoot.
Okay, I think it's a good closer. Do you have any cautionary tales or warnings that we should just look out for in the publishing world or just in the writing world in general?
Look out for people who are really competitive or like very obviously social climbers. I think it's very important to find 1 or 2 people who you trust and who are into the same things that you are. I have like a very small circle, but it's really all I need. Because like, okay, I've got a couple people that I really feel like I trust. Right. Yeah. You just get like a couple people and that's really it. Don't feel like you have to be on Twitter and befriend everybody. I mean, you can if you want, but don't feel like you have to do that because like a lot of that is just fake, to be honest. So that would be my main piece of advice.
So I think I have 2. One is similar to what Camille was saying earlier about rejection. And that is get used to it. But on the other side, you only ever need 1 yes in any step, in any process to move forward. So you might get a lot of no's, but you only need 1 yes from an agent. You only need 1 yes from an editor. You only need 1 yes to get a job. Like ultimately, rejection is constant. And I mean, even after you have a job, right, you could get a bad review, or even after you publish a book, you can get a bad review. So rejection will keep coming at you. So you have to really get used to that, but keep in mind that you only need 1 yes, 1 reader, sort of like 1 person who is on your team, by your side, got your back, which I think is also similar to what everybody's been saying about like finding your people. And then I think the other thing I will say is if your goal is to become like a writer and to write novels, beware of book 2. the second book is always fucking awful for everyone. And I think it's a combination of when you write your first book, you're sort of free and you don't have any deadlines. You're not even sure if it's gonna be a book. And then when you start with your second, you have deadlines, you have an editor, you feel like you have an audience that you're worried about losing. There's just a lot more expectations and stress. And also you're like, I did it once, but how do I know if I can do it again? So second book is tough, but you can do it.
Yeah, totally. I would also just add that I think it's easy for writers and people sort of involved in these worlds to take on more responsibilities than they can handle or that they should try to handle. Because, you know, you might, especially as like young people, like getting into the field, you might be trying to diversify your skill set, add things to your resume. So you might be taking on like unpaid gigs as readers at lit mags that are going to take up a couple hours of your week. And then you might have to be going to school, you might have to be working to pay your bills, make some money. And you might also be trying to like balance these various projects that you're working on. And so just being aware of your own capacity and how these hours that you're committing to each week are going to add up and could possibly infringe on your ability to write or have a clear mind at all. And I think that's a really easy thing to fall into just because of how many things you can take on in this world.
Yeah, absolutely. There's also, this is something that Charlotte touched on a bit, and Remy and I were talking about the other day, especially if you're in a college setting and in a like any sort of path of study, there's sometimes a really competitive mindset, and it becomes almost a like, oh, who's the most tired, who's the busiest, who's the most stressed. So it's hard, but be aware of that and try not to fall into it. You do not have to be the person running on the most caffeine and least sleep in the room. Like, you can take care of yourself. Yeah, okay, so we are way past time now. Does anyone else, the panelist or Remy, if you want to chime in, have any kind of final thoughts?
I had one final thought. Mental health is super important. So take your meds, drink your water, talk to your therapist, do all the things, whether you're in school, in your first job, working on your first book, whatever, like, take care of yourself. Like, that is the most important. And self-care is more important than deadlines. It's more important than anything, because if you're not at your best, you're not going to be putting out your best work.
Absolutely snaps to that.
Just thank you all for coming and for being here. This was really, really great. And I gained so much from your discussion. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you all so much for coming, Sierra, Ashley, Charlotte, and Camille. Thank you
for having us.
Yeah, this has been absolutely wonderful. We'll go ahead and close things out now. This has been recorded, so I can send the recording if y'all would like. Yeah, thank you all so much. Have a wonderful rest of your Sunday.
Bye. Good luck, guys.